Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're located. My name is Heigo Sato. This is the breakout session 2 of the second Tokyo Global Dialogue, hosted by JIIA. This breakout session, is titled "The Beyond the Geo-technology Competition?" ? I'm the moderator, as I mentioned earlier. Before starting this breakout session, just let me briefly introduce myself and what session is aimed at, for you can understand what the discussion is going to be. JIIA has been conducting several workshops and seminars with regard to the emerging technologies and how does it impact to the global strategic setting or security environment. And as you know, that emerging and or sometimes called the disruptive technologies have the greatest provides great opportunity both commercially and militarily. So this issue has some element of the competition among the states. As scholars of IR, I have been participating in some of the discussion within the JIA, and throughout the discussion, we found out that not just the competition elements of the emerging and emerging technologies, there are many elements of cooperation in terms of technology development and market exploration. There are many possibilities on this regard. So in this field of studies, emerging technologies and security, we have both the cooperation and the competition. And ideally, those two elements can coexist and co-develop. However, in reality, those coexistence is very difficult to strike a balance between competition and cooperation. Furthermore, those countries who is being in hard place in competition and cooperation is the two superpowers in the international society, which is the United States and China. And so, because of those conflicting, complex factors, I think the strategic element for the strategic reasons, the cooperation becoming more and more difficult to accomplish. Because the technology and the economic and technology development in cooperation with technology and cooperation economy, which would lead to the or stimulate the zero-sum sentiment of the countries, both U.S., China, as well as other countries like Japan. So to make it short, before inviting some of our panelists, I would like to make it short, that to short and conclude that U.S.-China technology competition during the Trump administration is not the feature that is unique to the Trump administration. That means what I want to say is the technology cooperation would continue throughout the Biden administration and beyond, I think. So in this breakout session, we would like to discuss two major issues. First issue is how we should be coping with this reality. During the Trump administration, we often heard about the Cold War 2.0 or decoupling of the US and China. However, from the tech development or technology cooperation point of view, this reality is a result of the competition of the tech hegemonies between two countries, or is this the source of the conflict itself? So we would like to explore what Trump administration has been doing and what US and China or how the commercial companies should be coping with this reality. And the the latter half of the session, we would like to talk about the options for the US-Japan, excuse me, US and China, or maybe mostly from the third-party point of view. We are not inclined to be heading into the Cold War. We want more cooperation and more prosperous and cooperative world to be realized. So how should we distance ourselves from the discourses of Cold War 2.0 or decoupling, or what are the options we have in this turbulent world dealing with the technology competitions? With that, I would like to invite the three distinguished panelists today to discuss those issues. First panelist is Ms. Elsa KANIA. She's an adjunct senior fellow with a technology and national security program at the Center for New American Security. Her research expertise is focused on US-China relations, US military strategy, defense innovation, and other emerging technology issues. Second panelist I would like to introduce is the Donald Andy PURDY. He's the Chief Security Officer at Huawei Technologies USA. Mr. PURDY is overseeing the Huawei USA's cybersecurity assurances and user privacy protection programs. And he leads the East-West Institute Global Cooperation in Cyberspace Initiative and the cyber. And he has extensive experience in the US government before joining the Huawei Technologies USA. Last but not least is Jun NAGASHIMA. He's a senior research advisor at the Nakasone Peace Institute. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, and he has been served as the Government of Japan Cabinet Councilor and Deputy Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary for National Security Secretariat in Japanese government. So we have this distinguished scholars and practitioners and government officials, and I think we can have a very constructive and innovative discussion on the as in hour or a half in the session. So in starting the first half of the session, we have already posed some of the important questions to the panelists, and I would like to ask, iterate once again here for the audience, and I think I hope that the panelists could answer in 5 to 8 minutes each. And the first question is to Elsa. You're located in Washington, and you're in the think tank business. And you know what the discourse is in the U.S. and how the debate is going on in the Washington D.C. And you have extensive experience advising the both or making a policy recommendation to both Trump and possibly the Biden administration. So the question to you is that how do you assess the Trump administration's strategic technology policy towards China, and how should we develop in the Biden administration? that is a question to you. Please, Elsa.
First of all, good morning. I hope you all are well and staying healthy. And I am very honored to be joining the Tokyo Global Dialogue for this important conversation at a moment when these issues are very much in transition and the subject of heated debate and concern. I suppose I'll say to start by way of framing an introduction that it's certainly been over the past couple of years, an interesting moment to be trying to make sense of how technology and innovation are playing out in US-China relations. And I think in some respects, we have seen the culmination of trends that predated Trump's election and some structural features of US-China relations and rivalry that are much more enduring in nature and have and reflect the realization of longstanding aspirations in Chinese policy and strategy and the objective of leveraging science and technology as a means to enhance national power in the course of progression towards national rejuvenation. I think what we've seen under Trump and what I think we might expect to continue under Biden is a recognition of the competitive challenge that China presents. And I think until even not long ago, there still tended to be sometimes a level of confidence that at worst could border upon complacency within the United States about American technological leadership, looking to the progress from places like Silicon Valley or my hometown of Cambridge, Massachusetts as well. And I think that there has been a realization by American policymakers that China can no longer be dismissed as a copycat or imitator, that instead the issues at stake between the US and China in science and technology are no longer merely limited to concerns of IP theft or tech transfer, but instead are more far-reaching when it comes to the ways in which China has achieved some success in developing capabilities in indigenous innovation, often enabled by the absorption of foreign technologies to that end and advanced through industrial policies, including often extensive subsidies that have enabled Chinese companies to achieve market share within critical industries. So yeah, I think what we've seen over the past 4 years has been a reaction from the US government to these realities. And I think reactive is also the word I would use to characterize much of what we saw coming out of Washington, D.C. in the course of the Trump administration. And I think I am still not convinced we saw a coherent strategy play out over the past 4 years, to be very honest, because I think we've seen a lot of measures and a lot of sort of instincts and inclinations playing out, sometimes in ways that could be at odds or contradictory at certain moments. And certainly there has been, in particular, over that time frame, a lot of talk about the idea of decoupling. And I have yet to hear a single great definition of what decoupling is intended to be, but this term implies a separation and pulling apart of the US and Chinese economies in ways that I think are, the theory is sometimes at odds with realities. And the complexity of what we're seeing today arises in the fact that there is a fascinating concurrence of competition and cooperation between the US and China, as we heard in our great opening remarks, that really complicates the idea that this is or could be a new Cold War or a tech Cold War. If only the world were that simple, a policy would be much easier, but instead we see a much more complicated and integrated landscape in which the US and China regard each other as each other's greatest rivals, including in the realm of science and technology, but there also is such extensive engagement and cooperation between American and Chinese researchers, as well as enterprises, and often that level of technological engagement does convey great and mutual benefits. Of course, sometimes that level of integration also produces friction when there are concerns or incidents where the openness of America's innovation ecosystem, something that I believe is a critical and core advantage for the United States, can also be exploited, including through legal, illicit, and extra-legal mechanisms of tech transfer that we've seen provoke a lot of controversy. And in terms of particular policies on these fronts, we've seen a number of different instruments come into play with the aim of responding to concerns about the status quo ante or the prior situation in US-China economic and technological engagement. And of course, there have been measures intended to promote American economic security, including improved and enhanced authorities for the screening of foreign investments, as well as new export controls that are now more targeted based on the addition of new end users that are to which the export of certain technologies is restricted, and a rethinking of the controls and constraints upon the diffusion of sensitive technologies such as semiconductors, including the frequent employment of a mechanism known as the Entity List by the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security. And often, in effect, these measures involved bans on Chinese companies, such as through an executive order that invoked emergency economic powers, and often the rationales either were illegal activity, as alleged by the US government by those companies, or their apparent involvement or a complicity in human rights abuses. So I think we've seen questions of economic security, national security, and human rights all come into play when we think about the US government's approach to emerging technologies. And another complicating dimension of this issue has been China's national strategy of military-civil fusion, a strategy that has aimed to break down barriers between commercial and defense-oriented developments and improve the levels of integration, which further blurs the bounds and raises new risks when we're thinking about technologies such as artificial intelligence or biotechnology that can span the gap between commercial and defense impacts going forward. So I think there is a lot to discuss, and I will look forward to hearing and learning from my fellow panelists in the course of the hour, and I look forward to all of your questions and conversation. But I guess I'll say in closing, as we look ahead to the Biden administration, I think we can expect to see continuity on some fronts, but changes on others. For better and perhaps for worse in some cases, there is, or at least for now appears to be, relative bipartisan consensus in Washington on regarding China as a strategic competitor, even potential adversary. And I would argue that the competition between the US and China is a reality that we can trace back to the 90s, but is only now starting to be openly recognized and acknowledged within both capitals. And I think that certainly there are drivers and elements of China's strategy and behavior that I think are likely to remain consistent as well under Xi Jinping, and including, again, the focus on innovation-driven development as a means of pursuing national rejuvenation. And I think we'll see the Biden administration in its current and ongoing, I believe, review of China policy evaluate the range of measures that Trump's teams had introduced, evaluate their relative efficacy, as well as perhaps unintended consequences of some of those measures. And what I hope we'll see going forward is a progression towards a strategic approach that is more nuanced and recognizes the complexities of US-China relations and involves instruments that are very carefully targeted and calibrated to ensure that US policies best advance US interests without causing undue negative impacts. And I think finally, I hope that we'll see, I know we've seen some very positive trends in US-Japan engagement and cooperation on tech issues over the past 4 years. And I hope we'll see that continue and expand going forward as this alliance is important to our shared capacity to tackle the challenges ahead and leverage the opportunities that arise with these technologies and the world we're facing today with all the complexities of the 21st century. So thank you again, and I'll look forward to continuing the conversation this evening and morning.
Thank you, Elsa. Yeah, I think I agree. I mostly agree with you about the issue you raised. There are both competition and cooperation in the U.S.-China relations, and technology cooperation is one of the issues which we are dealing with. We have to deal with human rights. Maybe we have to deal with their military expansions, or we have to deal with we can cooperate with China in the environmental issues, and there are many places where we can. There are many places where competition, cooperation coexist. And I also agree with you that the Trump administration was very reactive to the reality itself. And I hope that the Biden administration could be more proactive with nuanced and calibrated strategy coming in, and not just we facing to the Cold War 2.0, but the more cooperative and the stabilized international strategic settings. And the next speaker, Andy, we know that you have extensive experience in the U.S. government with regard to cybersecurity, and now you're in the Huawei Technologies USA. So you have both somewhat glimpse on the U.S. policy and the commercial and reality and the Chinese strategies. So my question to you is, how has the U.S.-China geo-technology competition affected the market and industry behavior? I know that you are not representing the market or industry itself, but from your viewpoint and with a sense that Huawei is unfortunately the target of the U.S.-China, one of the issues between the U.S.-China geostrategic technology competition. So maybe you have many things to argue and many things to claim, or many things to explain. So I will hand the microphone to you. Please, Andy. Your mic is muted, I think. Thank you.
To be a member of this panel, to participate in this conference, as summarized by the introduction and some of Elsa's comments, the entire conference could focus on the issues that we're going to cover in these two parts. The opportunity to participate in this conference reminds me of my many trips to Japan, a number of them, as when I was in charge of cybersecurity for the U.S. government, taking messages from the U.S. Department of Defense to your defense, meetings with your government, your cabinet folks. It's an honor to participate in this conference. And as you know, America values Japan as a very, very important ally. And it just was always so meaningful to be there and to have meetings there and here in Washington. And I do hope that by this time next year, we'll be able to come back to Tokyo for conference and meetings. I agree with, I think, just about every word that Elsa said. I would summarize it in a couple of different things. And I think there is a tradition of the way diplomacy, bilateral and multilateral, happens that was somewhat broken by the approach that the Trump administration took. So while, as Elsa said, there are a lot of bipartisan things, a lot of bipartisan issues that the U.S. had with China coming into the Trump administration. And the Trump administration manifested those issues in a much more public, and some might say bombastic way, in the way that they raised these issues with China. And sometimes it looked like some of the measures were trying to drive short-term progress for economic reasons, for trying to get additional purchases by China of American products. Some said it looked like President Trump was trying to get concessions that would help his chances for re-election. But I think the fact is it's important to remember that there are important bipartisan issues that are long-standing. They go back at least back in the time when the U.S. started that long 14 or 15-year effort to help China get into the World Trade Organization. So I'd say one is the rules of international trade, the rules of globalization, and Elsa talked about free trade, forced technology transfer. There are a number of issues that there are deep concerns by both parties in the United States, and the Trump administration brought it to the fore more than perhaps in the past, and it was almost in a way of a burst of anger for what many in the U.S. thought was unfair conduct for quite some time. And with the public posture and the evolution of the China government, which was very different than what was expected when the U.S. helped lead the effort to bring China into the World Trade Organization, there was a widespread hope, and I don't mean to be sophomore telling you this, a widespread hope that it would mean an opening up of the China government and a greater transparency, so that while there would be market forces and economic forces at work, that perhaps there would be more of an open government. But there's a bipartisan sense in the U.S. that that's not the way that the China government has evolved. And so, in a way, the China government is China's own worst enemy in terms of a lot of these issues, because it's hard to tell what kind of statements are for domestic consumption and how much are really intended for internationally. But of course, we hear it and it causes concern. So the idea that there have to be norms of conduct, there have to be the rules of the road for international trade and fair practices and fair dealings and consistent practices. So that's one very important thing. Another, as Elsa touched on, is the competition between the U.S. and China. Although the U.S. In some ways dramatically, but in other ways still significant, maintains an important technological innovation lead over China. But when you look at the overall economic and military power of China, the U.S., as is basically the requirement for one of the leading countries in the world, is concerned about what the intentions are or might become for China. So the U.S. wants to make sure that they are safe, that there's close relationship with allies, and that there are rules to be followed. So the issue of competition, sometimes the anger that I mentioned has manifested itself in terms of, okay, well, let's just hurt China. Let's block things. Let's stop things. And I think we start seeing in the Biden administration a different approach. I think, and it's early, of course, but the emphasis on multilateralism, I think, will be welcomed by allies around the world. The recent executive order about the semiconductor industry and supply chain, the emphasis on not just blocking competitors, but building the American technology, the technology of America and its allies. And obviously, Japan is a very close ally. And the focus with the National Security Council, Ann Neuberger, her leadership in cybersecurity, because that's a major issue touching on supply chain risk. It's clear that with the recent SolarWinds attacks, and it's not just SolarWinds, but other companies like that, supply chain attacks, it helps demonstrate what we've known for a long time, that nation states, there are sophisticated cyber actors among nation states that have the ability to hack into anybody's stuff. They can hack into the supply chain. For example, back in 2014, when Edward Snowden revealed the Prism Operation of the U.S. government, the U.S. didn't need Cisco's permission to implant surveillance in their equipment. The major countries of the world, and there are 5 or 6 of them, have the ability to virtually implant software and technology. They don't need permission, okay? So I think what's clear from these attacks, and it's a wake-up call for the United States and others. Of course, we've had many wake-up calls in the United States that we then forget about over time. But it's a wake-up call that the defenses have to be increased. The defenses of our government, of our critical infrastructure. The supply chain needs to be raised. There needs to be greater transparency. So we use an expression, you got to open up the kimono. It's got to be easier to tell what the telecom and mobile operators are doing, what the equipment suppliers are doing, what other third-party suppliers like SolarWinds are doing, so that you don't just depend on a government or a company for them to tell you that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, for them to tell you that they're complying with the rules. There needs to be mechanisms and independent testing to make sure people are obeying by the rules. Because when we look at these new technologies, as you know, these 5G-enabled technologies that will be rolled out over the next 3 to 10 years, we as societies are going to become increasingly dependent on these technologies, whether it's 5G-enabled healthcare, whether it's the efficiency of manufacturing, green farming, and so forth. We will become dependent on these technologies because computing power has come to the edge. So big data analytics, robotics, automation, artificial intelligence will become dependent. So when I left the White House staff in 2003, we helped write for President Bush the National Strategy to Secure Cyberspace. So since then, there's been a lot of talk about cybersecurity being important. Cybersecurity now is really becoming important. Lives are going to be depending on it like never before. So these issues that have come up need to be addressed in a comprehensive way. So we have a lot of these things happening simultaneously in terms of the competition between China and the US. And so concerns about what might happen in the future have led some efforts to stop things and block the sales of semiconductors. And the idea that you want to hurt China by hurting Huawei, you want to block even non-sensitive semiconductors from being sold, and you have a situation, and you were both mentioning decoupling, that for example, for Huawei, we were spending $12 billion a year US. We spent $18 billion in 2019. That's about 40,000 American jobs selling non-sensitive semiconductor equipment to Huawei. And so it's hurting us. It's hurting a lot of people in the world. There's a supply shortage for chips. And we'll be hurt for quite a while. In the long term, if America doesn't decide to allow the semiconductors to be sold throughout the world, the American jobs will go away forever. And we will have an impact on globalization, because that is one of the things that when you look at the last 20 years, the somewhat free trade, the competition, that you don't have to make everything yourself. You buy some here, you buy some there, everybody benefits, has moved millions of people around the world out of poverty. And of course, even now you see in different places like China, some of the manufacturing is going to Vietnam or other places because the jobs are not such great jobs. So as we go into cyberspace, we also need traditional cyber diplomacy, but we have to go farther. We need rules of the road. We need standards. We need conformance programs. We need independent testing. We need transparency. And we need governments. It can't just be all about norms of conduct. Governments have their meetings and kumbaya, we're all going to follow the rule. No, we have to sign mutual trust agreements by governments. We have to get companies to sign mutual trust agreements. These are the rules. This is what they're going to follow, and there are going to be consequences, perhaps similar to the punishment levels of the European privacy rules, the GDPR. It can be up to 4% of global gross revenues. We need companies to have to pay if they violate the rules. And the global community needs to improve the capability of attribution, technical attribution, so we can tell more specifically than can we before who's behind this, and we have to hold those folks accountable. So it's a gigantic topic. I'm sorry to be a little long-winded. It's very exciting, and again, it means a lot to me to be able to participate in this session.
Thank you, Andy. You raised many good points. Supply chain risk is there, but you cannot exclude one or two companies because of that brand name, because those companies provide a lot of commercial products in the globalized world, and those are the assets for the global welfare. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there are discourses blended to the Huawei that Huawei is presenting some security risk to the U.S. Defense defense establishment, so to say. But it is true, however, those shock waves would, in the coming years, would be harmonized in somewhat, and we could find the ways in which to coexist with the risk and the opportunities, and to go to the middle ground between the risk and opportunities. I think, as you mentioned, the rule-based order and the rule-based business is one of the keys under this globalized world. The last but not least, Jun Nagashima, I would like to ask you about the issue of Japan. We have been witnessing the US-China tech hegemony competition, so to say. But from the Japanese point of view, whether either you can base on the corporations, companies' perspective, or self-defense forces, or government, whatever you choose, how do you assess the costs and opportunities of the US-China tech hegemony competition? And what is your assessment on this matter? Please, Jun.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Sato. Elsa, Andy, I'm very much delighted to be present in this dialogue together with you. As a security specialist, from my point of view, in fact, it appears to me that the international conventional regime that was established based upon the Treaty of Westphalia back in 17th century is now facing a kind of challenge by China in terms of the sovereign state, international laws, and balance of power, among others. And that's where China is involved. In other words, when we talk about the Cold War, well, in terms of phenomena, we don't think we can call it the Cold War based upon the international system. Those two countries, the United States and China, are there, and internationally there is no blocks formed, and there is no the military confrontation around the clock, and therefore this is not defined as the Cold War. However, from data and technology point of view, you might call it the emerging Cold War, and in fact that is actually emerging, especially when it comes to data. We are now in the modus of data-driven economy, represented by GAFA. They are the main drivers of a global economy. And with the big data application, there will be new industries emerging, and therefore the conflict and competition over data would be the core to what is happening. And as Andy stated, that is embraced by ICT, large capacity, super high speed, multi-connectivity, redundancy are there. And then there is AI, autonomous system, the quantum technology, and even biotechnologies are there. And when they're combined in an exponential way, the volume data would increase, and therefore data and disruptive emerging technologies are there, over which there is a confrontation and the competition, and that could be viewed as a kind of Cold War. In terms of internet, the United States advocates what is called the Clean Network Initiative, while as in the case of China, they advocate a Great Firewall, trying to differentiate themselves and shut others out. And also through regulation and exclusion over applications. Some are trying to disrupt the exchange and flow of data and information, which is not at all beneficial for the mankind. In fact, the innovation speed would be slowed down. And what was considered as the common goods internationally may be locked out. And as a result, that could result in the imbalance in the international system, thereby affecting international relationship. And therefore, this is not simply viewed as the conflict between the United States and China, nor the matter exclusively limited to Japan. In fact, this is the common challenge for the global community. And then, what was the impact to Japan? That was part of the question by Mr. Sato. In the short run, not much in terms of the short-term the changes, because from security point of view, the United States still represents a major presence and secures its presence in Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific as well. And so far, China is quite active in East China Sea and South China Sea, and they are not affected by the presence of the United States, and therefore, as far as what is visible to us, no major changes there in the short run, but there could be enormous impact in the long run. And I think this originates from the United States. That is about the interdependence of the supply chain. They started to give a fresh look. And with the Biden administration, they're advocating bringing back supply chain within the United States. And then the second point, that is about what is called EDT, Emerging and Disruptive Technology. And now there is a hegemony and the competition over hegemony of such a new technology. And furthermore, for investment and export control security clearance, United States is interested in increasingly introduce stringent measures which is now affecting European countries. And therefore, from risk and opportunity point of view, if I put the conclusion first, I believe there was more opportunity than the cost. The major reason was that so far in the long run, Japan has been working on various initiatives, facing various issues related to economy and industry, and for research and development of new technologies. They started to form a new point of view, more specifically, direct investment from Japan to abroad, export control, the integration, and the new approach to research and development are now beginning, and also patenting system, the government funding for research and development. They are now under investigation and verification, and therefore, from my point of view, there are two sides to it, costs and opportunities. And therefore, in a nutshell, for export, investment, and patent, I would say that the systems and regulations in Japan are changing. And also, as a result, we expect the research and development of leading technologies and international joint the research and development approaches would be more and more encouraged. But looking outside of Japan, there are again two sides to it, cost and opportunities. Within Western countries, it appears that they are now raising their concern level against China, and therefore they have come to realize the geopolitical importance of Japan. As we discussed in the morning, Quad and FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific Ocean, and the regional cooperation framework are now reinvigorated and being pursued, and also human rights abuse and what is called the wolf warrior diplomacy by PLA. They are viewed as coercive, and therefore the China posing a threat is now commonly shared. And in terms of relationship with China, I don't think there is major impact coming from US-China conflict yet in East China Sea and South China Sea, as well as the territorial issues in sky and cyber space as well. No changes, and therefore I have to say that so far we are somewhat quite reluctant to see the current situation. And this concludes my introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jun. I was greatly encouraged by your assessment. That we are entering the turbulent. We are about to enter the turbulent era, but we are still could able to manage what we are to not this to make it worse, in a sense. Excuse me. But as you mentioned, I think the Japanese government has many homework to be done, including the security clearance issues or black boxing of the technologies, and how to be the equal competitor or equal actor in the global technology competition is one of the issues which Japan has to be dealing with. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Before going into the second half of the session, because we are slightly running out of time, I would like to make the question to you, to all three, three of you, same question. I think the issue in the US-China tech Cold War 2.0 is all about threat perception or sense of challenge to the existing order, including the commercial, strategic, technology, or whatever you name it. But the competition between countries, especially from the emerging countries, is in a sense normal setting in the history of international relations. So, can I briefly ask each one of you about what is so special about the Chinese challenge to the existing international order? And from the technology point of view, there are technology issues are very cruel because of the technology is a source of the power, or source of the national power, so that technology dominance or superiority would make would certainly provoke the very disruptive sentiment among countries. And as Elsa mentioned about the statecraft, technology itself is a means of the economic statecraft. And many of the means, including the emerging tech and especially the dominance of the natural resources, is the source of the statecraft of each countries. And it seems that China is exploiting, and as the US is also exploiting their advantage in both economy and technology. So with that background, how do you assess the threat perception of, or what is the state of the US-China US-China rivalry or relationship from your viewpoint? Or put it simply, what is the source of threat perception or a sense of challenge in this US-China strategic setting? So it might be a very vague question, but I think there are many ways in which you can answer. So let me start with Jun first. Can you answer my question, please?
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. With regards to your question, from two perspectives, I'd like to try and respond. Firstly, what is the problem with the technology policy in China? Government-led, naturally. What China is considering, China's standard to 2035, China, utilizing its technology, is going to standardize globally, and it is going to lead international globalization, standardization. By standardization, China, well, in the past, Windows 95 operating OS came out, and from hardware to software, everybody is Windows 95 compliant. So this is when such a technology, outstanding technology is established, such a status may occur. So the technology hegemony by China will occur. And then there's a convergence of military and civilian. And there's no boundary between military and civilian technology. And as Elsa mentioned earlier, private sector developed technology and military developed technology converge and will be utilized or installed into military equipment and will be used in weapons as well. That's the first point. Secondly, I talked about division. Another aspect is encirclement. Currently, One Belt, One Road, and Digital Silk Road. And in a sense, it's economic hegemony. And there has a connection of satellite and ground system, and 5G. ICT technology is installed, and fintech is involved as well. In a sense, the region is going to be encircled. And this will bring about the division of the region. If this is shared, that's fine. But compatibility is not there, then there's conflict. As a result, certain region will become isolated completely. Then, globally, the growth will be impeded. Sorry for the lengthy intervention.
Andy, please.
Well, if I understood you to be calling on me, I think the competition and the growth of China militarily and economically has put the world in a situation and put the United States in a situation they haven't been in before. I mean, to some extent, the Cold War, it was life and death in terms of nuclear weapons between the then Soviet Union and the U.S. But in terms of the amount of capacity, both economic and militarily, in terms of the U.S.-China competition, is something that I don't really remember in recent history. So part of the concern, in addition to things like particular geographic theaters, as was mentioned in terms of the South China Sea or things like that, where powerful countries get to do things that less powerful countries don't get to do, and the projection of power, both in terms of economic influence, political influence, and military influence. I think the U.S. liked the world better, and I can understand from their perspective, liked the world better when the U.S. really was kind of the overpowering country of the world and would work a lot of folks, and basically the kinds of goals that the U.S. wanted would be what would be accomplished, and there was less likely to be major outbreaks of war, after the Second World War in particular. So I think there is real concern by the U.S. About the intentions of China long term. So the combination of, you talked about competition and collaboration, you talk about fear. It's not just about military fear. It's about fear that, for example, China's economic power can force other countries to go along, whether it's votes in the UN, whether it's votes in the World Trade Organization, whether it's political decisions, regional undertakings, trade policy, and standards. And frankly, I think having global standards is really the best for the world. China has started to take an initiative recently, and fortunately, in the last year, the United States has decided they want to get more involved in 5G standards, as one example, which I think is hugely important. We've been criticized because we're too powerful, but we work closely with our competitors, Nokia and Ericsson. And having the United States play a role in standards, having global cooperation for standards, conformance programs, testing, the kinds of things we see Germany and the European Union through the European Network Information Security Agency do. Those are really good things. We saw the negative effects of, for example, different wireless standards in different parts of the world over the last decades. And we need to really, for the betterment of organizations and citizens, we need to have common standards and common conformance programs, common rules of the road.
Thank you. Elsa, please.
We're at a really unique moment in history today, and often the way that Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party describes what we're seeing play out is the notion of profound changes unseen in a century. And this phrasing refers to not only the unfolding Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is believed to have significant implications for China's rise and American decline by the view from Beijing and the changing foundations of what economic and military power will involve in the years to come, but also the impact of the pandemic that we've seen playing out has again brought this idea of a moment of inflection to the forefront. And I think that we saw in the course of the pandemic ways in which science, technology, and innovation were at the forefront of national response and capability. And it was remarkable in many respects to see in China ways in which AI and 5G were leveraged for practical purposes in pandemic control and prevention, whether that was AI-enabled disease surveillance and diagnosis, or 5G-enabled robots for disinfection or delivery. And I think certainly China's capacity to leverage and mobilize innovation and reach the objectives set to be the first to control the pandemic, the first to resume work and production, and the first to achieve positive economic growth. Arguably, if that was the task Beijing set for itself, and China has, for the most part, based on many of the indicators come out, accomplished that. So I think when we think about what competition really is and means, especially in the wake of the pandemic, I think we've seen this crisis really reveal strengths and weaknesses of the US and Chinese systems in some respects. And I think certainly within the United States, it's exciting that we have been the first to develop some very successful vaccines, but we've also seen some challenges and shortcomings with the capacity to scale up production and implement vaccination at scale. And of course, there's also been, I think, the reckoning that has to be grappled with in American domestic politics as a result of failures to control the pandemic that resulted in us reaching the point we were today. And I think a lesson that I hope the United States will learn from this is that innovation in the abstract and leadership as a vague notion or desire for dominance doesn't make a difference on some of the most fundamental challenges to national security and domestic security that begin at home. And I think personally, my view is that much of what the United States can and should do to be more competitive relative to China aren't about China. At the end of the day, they're about what the United States should be doing to have a thriving economy, to be a functional democracy with robust institutions and dedication to living up to our values and principles at home and in our foreign policy. And I think that these questions also arise as we think about how the United States will respond to the challenges and opportunities we see with emerging technologies, and how to ensure that these new capabilities are leveraged in accordance with core values and a commitment to equity and to some of the foundational freedoms and the commitments that the United States and Japan share as democracies at the end of the day. Because I think we can talk about technical standards and their intersection with questions of values in some cases, and we can also look at some of the really appalling applications of surveillance technologies within China that are deliberately targeted based on ethnicity against Uyghurs who have been subject to what many experts have deemed to be tantamount to a genocide or crimes against humanity. So I think that there are And certainly that is a crisis that is about much more than technology, but we've seen some of the most dystopian applications of big data and surveillance capabilities that are imaginable and unimaginable playing out in that context. So yeah, I think that when we think about what is at stake in this rivalry today, I think that it is not hyperbolic to say that the choices that our leaders make today and in the days and months and years to come will shape the course of the century ahead. And I hope that there are ways to reckon honestly with the magnitude of the challenges ahead. And I'm encouraged by ideas and agendas like Build Back Better, as we've heard from the Biden administration, which I think recognizes that we have to fix some systemic problems within the United States. We have to be honest in recognizing our flaws and failures, because that's who we are, honestly facing that and trying to face these challenges and recognize the opportunities to solve them and hopefully emerge stronger from this crisis going forward, and continue to live up to our values and find common ground from our values with our allies and partners. So we'll stop there for now, but it was a great question, and I think definitely a lot to discuss as we think about sort of what is fundamentally at stake at this moment in the wake of the pandemic, with the fourth industrial revolution, as it is often regarded, upon us, and the associated revolutions perhaps in military affairs and security as well. And I think we'll have to continue to think about what it means to innovate in a manner that is substantive and ensures that we see application of progress to the most pressing challenges that are facing our countries and the world today.
Thank you. Yeah, vaccine, AI, 5G, there are many remarkable technologies for common goods of our humankind and society at large. So I think there are many rooms to cooperate, and there are benefits of cooperation. And I think we should not indulge in the Cold War or competitive, overtly competitive discourses. And you have an additional comment.
Yeah, Elsa pointed out some of the advantages that the Chinese system apparently had in terms of making certain decisions and dealing with certain kinds of situations. I think we have to recognize, countries that have a different form of government, we have to recognize that for us to be competitive, we need to find ways consistent with our particular forms of government to still have strategic planning, to still have strategic leadership. You know, industrial policy is viewed badly. I mean, I think America needs, with our allies, a technology industrial strategy, hopefully led by the private sector, where we have to plan for what is most important to help us drive forward, what's most important in terms of R&D, and have kind of and that may take a little more time, a little more consulting, but for us to really drive forward with big projects, to really drive progress, we need to think differently than maybe we have thought before. I mean, there's some disadvantages to China, because China can make some really big, very expensive, stupid decisions very quickly. But it takes us forever, and often we just never think about it, and then we never start. But we have to be more strategic given the competition that we're in now.
Elsa, you have any reaction? Or Jun, you have any reaction to the comment? Okay. I think you raise a very good point. There are benefits of cooperation, but there are also a risk. And those risks are in some part manageable, but in some places are very difficult to deal with because, for example, like the governance issue or form of the government, or how the government react or act is historically constructed. So we have to be dealing with this complex, settings surrounding the competition cooperation. And the latter half of the session, I will go into about 30 minutes, I will refer to that point especially. Because I think we have to accept the world as it is, but we have to deal with the world for us to be more stable and peaceful and prosperous. In that regard, for us benefit of hosting this breakout session and dialogue in Tokyo, and I would like to ask each one of you about the what are the other third parties countries should be dealing with this competition and cooperation phase of the U.S.-China tech hegemony issues. And the specific question is like this. Are partnership feasible in the world where the US-China geo-technology competition and economic interdependence coexist? In this context, what is expected for Japan to act? There are easy answers to this question because we can align with the US and we should demonize China or Huawei. That's a very easy and a very destructive answer. But I do not inclined on that element. But if I can invite more constructive argument and recommendation, it is more than welcome. So, Elsa, you have another 5 or 8 minutes about the issue, and the specific question to you is that what policies do you think to expect the Biden administration will take over from the Trump administration, and what will it change? It's essentially about the continuity and discontinuity from the Trump administration. Please, Elsa.
Sure. So I'll first respond to your question or the point you had raised about partnerships and the role of third countries, because I think that there can be a tendency to portray the world as if it were bipolar, as if it were as we've discussed, a Cold War of sorts, despite the problems with that metaphor between the US and China, and as if all other countries were irrelevant or were expected to pick one side or another. And I think that is a very simple framing of the world that can perhaps be appealing in its simplicity, but that is inadequate in many respects, and certainly not a good basis for policy or strategy, because I think another way to review the world is becoming, in some respects, more multipolar, and one in which while we often regard the impact of emerging technologies as benefiting the US and China disproportionately, and perhaps that is a possibility, we're also seeing how many of these emerging technologies lower the barriers to entry and empower new actors and stakeholders. And we're seeing, again, this strange juxtaposition of geopolitics that are regarded as very competitive relative to a world in which science and innovation are very globalized and integrated for the most part, despite the frictions that integration sometimes produces at the same time. So yeah, I would say that I think a challenge for US and Chinese leaders is how to attempt to gain advantage in a world in which the technologies that are becoming a new foundation for national capabilities are often driven by developments from commercial enterprises, more so than the strategic technologies of the past, and are also quite inclined to diffuse very easily. So I think I would tend to challenge the premise that any single company or any single country will win or be the leader, or at least I think if we're trying to ask the question of who may win, we have to first define what winning would mean. And I don't think anyone quite knows, given the uncertainties about the technologies we're seeing evolve and emerge and converge so rapidly. So what does this imply for questions of policy? I think I would say that where I hope we'll see the Biden administration recalibrate is in recognizing that complexity and in recognizing that some of the statements we heard from officials in the past administration, such as that China is the #1 threat to the United States, are, in my view, absurd, given that there are so many threats that are much more systemic and much more urgent. And China certainly is among the greatest challenges for American foreign policy, national security, and leadership on the world stage in the years and decades to come. And I worry we are in the midst of and entering a rather perilous phase in US-China relations. But I think that US policy and strategy can't start, as we've already discussed a bit, from reacting against sometimes inflated or hyperbolic characterizations of China and its national capabilities. I think there has to be a recognition, as my fellow panelists have also mentioned, of the strengths and weaknesses of the US system and ways to improve our capabilities. And I think I'm heartened by some of the measures we've already seen start to be rolled out, such as to focus on trying to contribute to resolving the shortage of chips by building up indigenous American capabilities in semiconductors. And I think that what I hope we'll see is a recognition of our own history, that sometimes there is a narrative as if America is inherently innovative because that's who we are. And I would say that is not quite true insofar as our history and our policies have really had created the preconditions for that. And there's been some talk by the Biden administration, including in the context of the stimulus, of having much more robust and extensive investments in science and technology going forward, especially in basic research. And I think that is absolutely integral to our success going forward. And of course, questions of talent and education. I mean, these aren't policy priorities that are or should be unique to the United States. These are important for any country that wants to be successful in science and technology in this century or any century. A lot of these very fundamental questions around scientific research, recognizing education as a national priority, and also, especially for the United States, an inclusive approach to immigration that recognizes and welcomes the contributions of talent from around the world. So, yeah, I think the Biden administration, I hope, will, through ideas like Build Back Better, does seem to recognize that there is a lot of building to be done and a lot of investments to be made going forward. And I think some urgent issues on these fronts to be confronted. And I think we may continue to see, as we've discussed, some reorientation of prior policies and attempts to have more precise responses and the building of capacity to address some of the particular challenges of policy. But I think often, again, US policy can't and ought not to be just about China, because often I think we have to mitigate vulnerabilities that do start with questions around, for instance, data privacy and security, or having a more robust approaches to supply chains, as we heard from Andy. And I think that certainly when the US doesn't get the policies right, that creates vulnerability that the Chinese government or military or assorted threat actors can exploit. We've certainly seen appalling incidents of data breaches at scale, and in cases where companies and governments have failed badly. And I think that certainly we can't complaining about these problems, and certainly there is plenty of blame to be attributed to adversaries and threat actors that take advantage of this. But fundamentally, if you don't mind my quoting a line from the musical Hamilton, I am the one thing in life I can control. And I think that is perhaps a good mantra to keep in mind for all of us individually with the uncertainty of the pandemic, and for countries that are operating in a complex world, that we can't control, or we have limited capacity to influence the behavior of our partners or our adversaries and competitors, but we can control what we do to increase our resilience, our security, and make sure we have frameworks in place to respond to threats, whether natural or other countries. We've seen natural disasters, the impacts of climate change, the impacts of pandemics, and these all have impacts on geopolitics and the U.S. competitive position, but ultimately the best responses do start with, for the U.S. or for Japan or for any country, trying to make sure we are safe and we are prepared and we have the resilience to meet these threats going forward.
Thank you, Elsa. I got many points, good points, excellent points from you. But the overall message about Biden is trying to deal with a complex world with very nuanced and balanced approach compared to Trump is one of the encouraging messages I think I heard from you. Next, Andy, my question to you is, what are the constraints and necessary conditions from the view of the individual companies? Because companies are in the forefront of the competition among countries in the globalized world. From your perspective, what you are up to, and what do you expect Japan or Japanese government or Japanese company to react or act?
Let me first say that, Elsa, your comments are optimistic and encouraging and perhaps even inspirational. I think a world where the Biden administration is encouraging multilateralism, I think that's going to encourage cooperation, that one part of the competition cooperation. I think partnerships, including research and development, business partnerships, joint research centers in many countries are going to be very, very important. Competition, encouraging competition, I think is one of the things that countries and regions can do that can be most important. We see in telecom equipment, for example, that there is not enough competition. There is not enough capability of the companies, of our competitors, for example, to invest in research and development. And so the idea that countries will encourage greater research and development, will encourage new technologies, that's all for the good. Because when we lose competition, we are going to lose innovation. We're going to cause greater prices. We're going to have less resilience. And we will all suffer as a result. I think the idea of having greater transparency, so encouraging governments and customers, and this goes for supply chain as well. I've been part of an effort in our Commerce Department, our NTIA, National Telecommunications Group, for a software bill of materials. The idea that companies would provide greater transparency, because we can't just rely on the words of companies or governments or even coalitions. We have to have an ability to know, because this stuff is really going to matter. And so part of our research and development probably needs to be a greater transparency. How can there be a greater capability to know what the telecom equipment suppliers are doing, to know what the telecom and mobile operators are doing? Because when you look at the situation like a SolarWinds, where there were apparently intrusions, not just cyber attacks like a Saudi Aramco or something like that, that the bad guys get in the systems and they can be there for a long time. And so we need to figure out, the global community, how can there be cooperation with companies so there can be greater visibility? I know Germany's trying to do this in the system they're setting up that we're so encouraged by, so that you can see when is there concerning activity, and you can create capability. And we have a problem that's been going on for years to try to get companies to share information. There's concern about liability and what have you, but we need to find ways to protect them so that they share information, so we can connect the dots to find out about concerning activity, so companies can demonstrate that they are doing what they need to do, and the products can be tested so you can prove that they're not doing what they're not supposed to be doing. So these kinds of, and finally, I would perhaps add to something Elsa said. I think education and training is critical. Closing the digital divide that exists globally with probably 3 billion people that are not connected. In our country, and I assume there have to be pockets in Japan as well. In our country, there are pockets of intergenerational poverty, location-based poverty that goes on forever. And the digital divide is leaving those people behind. We need to train and educate those people so they qualify for better jobs, so that when there's a pandemic, they don't lose their jobs. They're not forced to work at great risk. We have to increase the training and education of our employees. We need to bring connectivity to citizens and quality devices so that they can learn, they can study, they can interact, even in the harshest times, like in a pandemic. And if we do that and bring the 3 billion people across the digital divide, that's going to help us grow and thrive and help the quality of life. We're all going to benefit from that. Companies, governments, and individuals.
Thank you very much. Yeah, companies need transparency. Yes, transparency is the base of the competition, and without a competition, our development would be disastrous. Yes, I agree with you on that point. Jun, you have my question, and I will repeat here. Given the technology competition and economic interdependence, we have to strike a balance between those two. But within the U.S.-China rivalry elements, add to that, what would be the Japanese economic national security policy would mean? Which are we heading into the strategic independence, or we are to be entangled within the bilateral competition between U.S. and China? Based on your government, not just based on your government experience, but from your personal view, yes, please answer this question in 5 to 8 minutes.
Thank you. It's a very broad question, I believe. But on the other hand, economic security, the areas are so intertangled and very complex. In Japan, as Society 5.0 is there to support the future of Japan. Technological innovation occurs, and virtual and physical space converge, and humans will be converged into that space. So maximize the convenience of technology, which will result in prosperity and seek equality of society. On the other hand, the speed of technological development is fast. Then, not just the U.S. or China, but humans will be swept by the wave of technology. Then, what is needed? It's value. What are the things that only humans can do? What does it mean to live as a human? So, fundamental question and fundamental value is called for. And that is the important key of the partnership going forward. The technology becomes so sophisticated and the society is very rational, but all the more it is necessary to look at the value, fundamental value of humans in today's world. The world is multipolar and not block, but depending upon the area of cooperation, different combinations might arise. So a sort of coalition, not allies, but coalition. For example, in the United States, Biden administration has a harsh view toward China, but cooperate for climate and environment issues. So on a case-by-cases, countries will be able to work together selectively. What is needed is freedom and equality and democracy. And with countries which don't share the same value, it should be difficult to establish partnership. And all we can do is to find midway in the field to strengthen partnership, you have to make clear what you are thinking about. Transparency and accountability is called for. And that is for the general public and externally also. What is your thought about a particular issue? You need to appeal that. And it is not just words, but it is something that can be documented. It can be strategy or concept or idea. Such ideas will have to be communicated so that you can identify a partner and work with partners. Countries which cannot do that will not prosper. Lastly, largest issue is innovation. Innovation itself is diverse, and diversity. Various people get together and various data, then something new will come. But with division, then ultimately, goal might be the same, but the time spent will be longer. Then the United States and China are not able to promote innovation by themselves. There will be difficult from the perspective of diversity. Then, depending upon the situation in the area of innovation, you have to secure diversity. In Japan, AI will be utilized, and for empowerment of women and elder people, and a partner, and various issues are there. And as a country, we have to explain, and externally and internally, that is an important pillar of the economic security policy. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All three panelists, Elisa and Jun, has presented a very wonderful point, and I realize, for the benefit of discussion, I realize that you have the same. You're pointing to the same, remedy to this U.S.-China relationship. That is the key word. I think I should frame it as a multilateralism or coalition. Multilateralism, in the academic terms, is based on the value or based on interest. So I would throw to all three of you the same question once again. What is and at the same time, I'm sorry, I will add to the my question is that all three of you pointed out that so-called ecosystem of the innovation is critically important, and within the multilateral framework or coalition framework, innovative ecosystem would be based on some preconditions or determined political or economic framework. Given all the elements I raised, my last question to you, all of you, is that is there a possibility of creating the some form of multilateral framework within the countries concerned, both including US, China, Japan, or other European countries, or South Korea, who can manage the healthy or stable innovative ecosystem? Because as I mentioned, there are competition and cooperation element in both defense or civilian technology developments. So countries have to compete, and the companies must compete, and other countries are in the midst of those complex relationships. So the final product, if the final product is some form of multilateral framework to manage the competition and cooperation, what would be what kind of multilateral framework would that be if the Biden administration can manage to create in the not just in the Indo-Pacific but in the global stage? I understand that this is a very awkward question, but I think I left you the rooms of maneuver in a sense. So please do so. Please enjoy my question. So starting from June, is that okay? Reverse order. The answer. I will expect answer from the reverse order for Jun, Andy, and Elsa. In excuse for the sake of my for the session, please summarize them in 1 minute. Please, Jun.
Thank you. Yes, I will do my best. The most important crucial would be data. Whether the parties are willing to share data, because if the data sharing is disrupted, there will be no innovation, no development. Therefore, whether the multiple countries are willing to share data, that will be most important. And also, among partners, the resilience would be important. How you can cover vulnerability so that as partners, how you can foster develop resilience, whether it is about resources or technology, how resiliency could be ensured, that would be most challenging. Thank you. ありがとうございました。では、アンディさんお願いします。
That's a pretty difficult question in only 1 minute. I just mentioned a couple things, not necessarily answering the question, but to Jun's point about data. I think data flows. I think the privacy of data is absolutely critical. We heard the battles about WeChat and TikTok in the United States. We need global standards on privacy, data protection. We need ethical standards regarding artificial intelligence, things like that. We need standards and we need transparency for communications risk and conformance programs and independent testing. We need measures to increase transparency so we know that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and find ways to hold people and organizations accountable.
Thank you. Elsa, please.
Great question. I'm not sure if I have a great answer, but a couple of initial thoughts in the time remaining would be, first, I very much agree with my fellow panelists on the importance of data, privacy, standards going forward. And with regard to transparency, I'd also add that I think an important element of that tends to be a rule of law. And I think that does tend to be a systemic difference that we see between the legal system within the People's Republic of China relative to a rule of law as we know it within the United States or Japan or other democracies, where there are kind of clearer frameworks and parameters and greater transparency with regard to the authorities of the government. Whereas I think within China, one of the major concerns around questions of data security has been the rather expansive authorities of the Chinese Communist Party and the opacity with which they are exercised and what is more often characterized as a rule by law system, including some of the opacity of interactions between the party state and technology companies that can involve potential for interference or opaque influence. And that's been, so I think some of the differences in rule of law and differences in transparency have been an important consideration for the US government in thinking about these questions of data and about the future trajectory of emerging technologies. And I think when it comes to multilateralism, there continues to be debate as to sort of whether the extent to which values and sort of shared norms among democracies should be the basis of that, or what would be the best configuration if there were to be a technology alliance or some growing coalition among like-minded countries and especially democracies. And a number of my colleagues at the Center for New American Security have looked at that in far more detail than I, so definitely would recommend their work to you. And I think there is much to discuss on all of these points going forward. And I know we've scarcely scratched the surface of many topics we've raised in the time we have, but I yeah, definitely I will look forward to continuing the conversation going forward, and I hope we may have some time for any further questions as well. We're happy to respond directly to the question that raised in the chat on rare earths, because that could be a panel unto itself. And I don't think we've quite solved these issues today, but certainly, never a dull moment trying to make sense of these topics in the world we're living in today.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I don't understand this. It was a very difficult question, and awkward question. But I'm sorry about that. But I think I got an answer, a very clear answer about what the direction which we should be heading into. And since we are about 5 minutes over time, so I think I will stop here. Because of my terrible mismanagement of the scheduled program, so I'm sorry that for the floor that I didn't have a time for a debate with the floor. Excuse me for that. But it's about the 1:05 noon time in Tokyo. And I think the world is they are entering into the time where you have to go to bed or you have to go to work. So I will stop here, and I will again thank all of you, Elsa and Jun, for excellent presentation and discussions. And I think I will end here, and I believe that our discussion will continue. Thank you very much.